I'm with Asha Jadeja, a venture capitalist in the Bay Area in California in the US. She's also heads the family Motwani Foundation, a scholar of Indian origin, a very well-known international affairs specialist. And today we are talking about something that is really fascinating, especially for us here in India, which is the storm that is roiling US campuses, especially key Ivy League universities. But before that, let me welcome you to ThePrint. Asha ji, welcome.
Thank you, Jyoti. Happy to be here.
We're of course connecting the time zones. You're in California. I'm right here in New Delhi, but I don't know.
I was in Delhi, by the way, just last week, just 3 days ago.
Okay, but it's quite cold here, and I'm sure you're in sunny California. But tell me a little bit about this storm in the three sort of Ivy League campuses in the US, Harvard, the University of Pennsylvania, and MIT, around free speech, around the war in Gaza. And let me just sort of put some facts out there. More than 18,000 Palestinians have been killed in the last 2.5 months since the Israelis have undertaken to eliminate Hamas from Gaza. We know what happened on the 7th of October when there was a big massacre in a southern Israeli town. And since then, the world has been completely consumed by this. But this free speech debate, Ms. Motwani, what is going on in the US campuses?
Oh, so listen, the war is separate, Jyoti. The war right now is separate in the sense that the war, I think it is an old problem. It's been around for a long time. The US, the Israel and US tried to broker a peace, tried to give a separate two-state solution, tried to give a state to the Palestinians in 1967, and Yasser Arafat denied that offer. And they continued to wage war against Israel, and they're paying the price now. And I actually think that this is a very justified war. But on a separate note,
you think this is a justified war?
Absolutely. I mean, it is shocking to me that on October 7, without any provocation, Israel did not want this war. Israel did not want to initiate this war. Mm-hmm. And for 60-70% of us in the US, it is a shock that this has happened. And this is exactly like 9/11, right? When 9/11 happened here, remember it was a bunch of terrorists who attacked US.
Right.
And what did the US do? It went and flattened 2 countries.
Yeah.
And so this is kind of similar dynamic, and I fully support Israelis, by the way, just FYI. But yeah. What's going on? Going on?
That's right. I think the war in Israel, the war in Gaza by Israel, of course, it's related to the storm in the US campuses, but not totally, because what's happening in these US campuses is about free speech. And as you know, that there was a US congressional hearing earlier this month. And I just
it's an older history. It's actually a much older history. It really is. It doesn't have much to do with the Israeli war, right? The problem is they've been triggering factors. So what they've done is the war has triggered, and basically it has brought out what has been going on. What has actually been a toxicity, Jyoti, on US campuses? What has happened is the US campuses are preponderantly extremely left-leaning. They're very Marxist, and openly so. It's not a secret. What has happened is that ideologically, the humanities and the social sciences have been captured by this whole rhetoric, the narrative, and the industry of victimhood.
But I think I'm just wondering if I should interrupt you here, because the whole First Amendment in the US Constitution is about free speech. I mean, you can be left, you can be right, it doesn't matter. I may or may not agree with you, Asha ji, but the fact is that you have the right to your free speech, thoughts, and expression, as do I. So these students who are protesting the war by Israel in Palestine, where so many thousands of people have been killed, what's the problem with that?
So here's what. So let me finish my original thought.
Sure.
So what has happened is post 9/11, there's a history to this whole thing. The context is that post 9/11, the Islamic world, the Arabic world actually went on a massive PR campaign in the US to combat Islamophobia, because America has become very Islamophobic now. They are very suspicious of Muslims. 99% of all FBI people on the watch list of FBI are Muslims. So the problem is that dynamic has spilled into the university now. And $8.6 billion of Qatari money, for example, has gone into the US campuses to set up Islamic studies departments and things like that. What has happened now is this event has triggered, actually brought out into the open, the fact that there is now been a massive polarization on US campuses between Muslims and Jews, or those who are supporting Muslims, those who are supporting. It's the fault lines are Muslims versus Jews. This is a huge problem. It's a very ugly problem. And the war has brought out this dynamic on campuses. Now, so what's happening right now is that, let's say if I said, for example, that I oppose the oppression of Muslim women in Islamic countries, I will be immediately called an Islamophobe.
So, but I think there's a slight difference here, Ashaji, because this is about free speech. And let me just refer to the US Congressional hearing earlier this month on the 5th of December, when these three heads of these three universities, the three presidents, were hauled up in front of the Congressional hearing. Elizabeth McGill, the former president of the University of Pennsylvania, because she was asked to step down, and then she sort of voluntarily stepped down after the hearing. Claudine Gay of Harvard and Sally Kornbluth of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, that's MIT. Now, these three women, all women, by the way, Claudine Gay is African-American, she's Black, Sally Kornbluth is Jewish. Now, it's interesting that the US Congressional hearing would ask these three presidents about freedom of speech on their campuses. Isn't it interesting? And especially
go
ahead.
The problem right now is not about the freedom of speech, it's about application of the laws of freedom of speech to different groups. So, for example, let's say the question, but if you I don't know if you saw both Stefanik and the gentleman who even brought up Body, to be honest, but both of them, the questions they asked were the following. They said that is the genocide of Jews, is it okay within the code of conduct of the university? Now, what's happening is, given that the universities have been following a certain ideology now of microaggressions, safe spaces, I mean, there are things like there are affinity groups now. I mean, this is an illegal thing that universities are doing. So, for example, so I'll tell you. For example, for the graduation ceremony, the universities, the Harvard, for example, allowed affinity groups to have celebrations based on race. This is illegal. Race has been removed from social fabric and from the narrative of US, academia and intelligence.
All about race, Ms. Jadeja. It's not, I mean,
the affinity groups are about race. So what happened was that...
the debate in America is a lot...
Let me finish, Jyoti. Jyoti, you need to let me finish.
Of course. Sorry, go ahead.
For example, there are affinity groups for Arabs. There are affinity groups for Indians. There are affinity groups for Pakistani and Muslim students. There are affinity groups for Palestinians. But whites and Jews have not been allowed. There's been no affinity groups for them. So what's happening is, what the pressure cooker that has been building up, the pressure in this pressure cooker that's been building up, is that there has been an assault on whites and Jews as people who are considered privileged. And they are the oppressors, and the oppressed are the Muslims and the Blacks. This rhetoric, I mean, I'm putting it on the sort of at a high 30,000-foot view, but this rhetoric has obsessed everybody. It has taken the US university campuses by storm. Everybody is obsessed about this oppressed narrative, and it's become an industry of victimhood. So this victim, who is a bigger victim? So now in this victim, imagine on a day when there is October 7th massacre of so many innocent people, the first thing that US universities do is they condemn Israel. I mean, this was so heartbreaking for the Jews, because they have been working with all these marginalized groups on their protests and on their
even I would say that's out of line, because what happened on the 7th of October is completely it was horrifying, it was hideous. and it is totally out of line. And I think you can't have stronger words to condemn what's happened. But I think in the wake of that,
but the problem is nobody condemned. So the problem is nobody in the US universities condemned these attacks. All they said is that it's context specific. This is just horrendous. It has devastated the nation. It has devastated the Jews in the United States. It has devastated campuses. And what's happening now is that there is this effort going on this whole freedom of speech. What can you call, what can you say about Muslims? What can you say about Jews? And it has become a sort of a bottleneck for any expression, for any dialogue. The only university that actually acted proactively on the day of October 7 was Dartmouth. Dartmouth actually got together, the professors got together and said, we need to do something before hell breaks out. And hell broke out on other campuses.
But would you say that but three presidents of three of America's biggest universities, private universities, of course, top names across the world, not just in the US, MIT, Harvard, and UPenn, for each of these presidents to tell the US Congress or the congressional hearing that it depends on the context. I think none of them were advocating that you have a language that supports the genocide of Jews. I don't think that was true at all. And each of them said that. So for
it
them,
was because of the call. See, what happened was when the universities plastered these big lights and banners saying from the river to the sea, right?
But what's wrong with from the river to the sea? And these
no. So it is an Islamic thing that's been going on in Palestine. It's an old one. It's an old trope that's been around for a long time, where it says, where the Islamists have been saying, in Hamas especially has been saying, that we need to destroy Israel. You see, these are calls for the destruction of Israel. And today, Hamas has said 3 times already in the last 1 week that we are going to destroy Hamas, come what may. It is said in our Quran, we are going to do this, we are going to remove the last Jew. And they keep quoting a certain verse from the Quran saying that this specific that, if like the last Jew will be hiding behind a stone or a tree, and the tree or the stone is going to call on the Muslim to go and massacre that last Jew. And it is only, so unfortunately, because of reliance on scripture by Hamas, what's happening is Hamas is now is hell-bent. Of course, they're going to be gone. I'm absolutely certain, and I pray.
Yeah, I think there are 2 points here. The first is that this slogan, from the river to the sea, Palestine shall be free. This slogan has been resounding across not just campuses in America, but across the world, especially across the Western world. I mean, if you've noticed how in London, week after week after week, in Trafalgar Square, in the center of London, this slogan echoes across the protests that have been building. Now, in fact, what is interesting, and that's it's like a comparison with what's happening in the US, because the London police, and this I know for a fact, was asked whether they should shut down these protests. Again, it was the political class, and there was this conversation, and the police said, we cannot shut down these protests because from the river to the sea is not something that is provokes violence or induces violence. So they have not shut down those protests. So campuses in America,
they have banned from the river to the sea, but they do allow protests, of course.
No, from the river to the sea has not been banned. That particular slogan, in London, that particular slogan has not been banned. I'm sure
but in the US it is banned now, Jyoti. In the US it is banned.
So that's a comparison. Yes,
you will go to jail if you say from the river to the sea in the US.
Because so what kind of free speech is that? I mean, if I can't even say it doesn't provoke violence, what is the First Amendment? How does it protect me then?
So if I were to say something about, let's say that has been a trope for centuries about Black genocide, right? Lynching of a Black man. And there are words which are coming from the Jim Crow past. Yeah. If I were to use those specific phrases and say that, let's go lynch a Black man by saying whatever, let the bird fly over that XYZ tree, right? If I said that today, I would go to jail. Because these are certain tropes that are absolutely not allowed. Anything that is, so what I'm saying is that, look, this is not something that is lightly taken, and people didn't understand. In the beginning, nobody knew that river to the sea is such a dangerous thing, and it's got such such an awful history of terror and death and violence. It's not, in fact, in ISIS, it was happening. ISIS was using river to the sea also. So this is not something new. And so this has, but this, so remember about free speech, it's the application of free speech fairly and equally to everybody. That's what the Jews are fighting about. They are saying that if you are saying this to the Muslims, that you can say what you want, but the Jews can't say it, then they are saying that that's not fair.
No, I think Jewish students should be allowed to say what they want, and as long as there's no violence on the campuses, and
there is oppression of the Jews. No,
and if it's about exactly.
Yeah,
so
the
no oppression of the Jewish students.
Right now, the oppression, the reason this whole thing has become a pressure cooker is because there is this oppressed industry that has sprouted on US campuses for the last 10 years or 20 years now. And the victimhood industry has exploded. And you have anybody who is, if you do well, or if you're prosperous, you are automatically, it's seen as a proof of guilt. And you are automatically seen as an oppressor. The white people and the Jews especially, they are and now increasingly Hindus, mind you, because Hindus are doing well.
So can I say this, Asha ji, I just want to ask you, you're a venture capitalist. Now, for example, the president of UPenn, who resigned or who stepped down, shall we say, after the congressional hearing, and there was a lot of criticism about her comments at the hearing itself. But what is also true is that a lot of the funding that comes into these US campuses is by Jewish people, by Jewish business people. Now, they are putting pressure on these leaders of these university campuses to step down. And certainly that's one of the reasons why Ms. McGill, she was sort of either asked to step down or she voluntarily did. We don't know that, of course. But would you say that this linkage between private enterprise and education, do you think that's a fair one? And that pressure should be or can be applied by private enterprise to impose its own views on education?
So here's what, there's a history there. Okay, there's a history of tying, there's a history of sort of right and wrong. It's kind of a moral history that has been implicit in campuses for a long. For example, if you see a campus where there is open hatred of Black people, you will find, or open hatred of especially of gays, and we are talking about 20 years ago, of the gays, or there's opposition to to abortion rights. A lot of donors actually pull the funding if the university doesn't do anything about it. So there is a history there of activist donors. There's no doubt about it. And the universities are 50, 60, $70 billion of endowments now from alumni. So there is no, and they're actively, I mean, look, I am pitched by my university, which is Stanford, almost at least once or twice a year for funding. As an alumnus, I'm constantly hounded by some groups within university for funding, a chair of India studies, or funding, the Rajiv Motwani lectures and so on. Now, if I do that, what, normally a donor like myself would say, look, I want a board seat, or I want an advisory board seat, or I want some oversight into how my money is going to be used. So when you find that if you find, like, for example, right now, the Stanford president was fired. Not fired, but he resigned under, mysterious conditions, actually. Now, for us, it is, I really, for many of us were upset that Tessia Levine was basically fired and was hounded for no serious reason. If Claudine Gay had problems with plagiarism, and if they could forgive her, then some of the data that came out of the labs of the president, Tessia Levine, at Stanford, that data, if that data was lacking in something, that should have been forgiven. We are all upset about that. But why is Claudine Gay not being fired while Mark Tessia Levine was fired? Why? I mean, these are questions that we all ask. These are routine questions, by the way.
So Claudine Gay, the president of Harvard, just to
Claudine is Claudine Gay is the president. So many of us are asking those questions, that why was the Stanford president fired for just a little bit of discrepancy in the data, which he was not responsible for? And why is Claudine Gay sitting there Forget
Why do you think? Why do you think? Why do you think, Asha?
No. So first of all, after the Congressional, a lot of people did some research on her and said, look, she's plagiarized entire chapters. She's lifted from somebody else's research. And this is plagiarism. She should be fired, if nothing else, for plagiarism. And
yes, but that has nothing to do with the Congressional hearing itself.
Correct. I agree there.
So in this particular case, I think it was her faculty, the Harvard faculty, that stood up for her. And that's why she hasn't stepped down, or at least not so far.
Right. That's right. And they did. And I think that was the right thing, because there shouldn't be pressure because of this Congressional, even if you don't agree with the Congressional hearings, the pressure shouldn't be coming from, from the board to such an extent that you're looking at plagiarism and this and that. For me, I think it was unnecessary. But that said, all of us are donors there at Penn, or the donors who are there. These are large hedge fund managers, venture capitalists, private equity guys who are there, who are on the board, and who want to exercise some amount of oversight on what's happening with Jewish students. And they're not necessarily only Jewish donors. There are also other donors who are, like, for example, Indian donors are beginning to look into these things now and say that, look, we accept certain things and we don't accept certain things, and we are drawing certain boundaries.
Like what?
So it's like, for example, on this whole idea of restriction of speech by faculty in the humanities. And there has been a growing intolerance in humanities and social sciences towards those who break out of the mold. So those who may not be left-leaning ideologically, and let's say they're center-left, they will not be allowed to speak. Their lectures will be cancelled. There'll be heckling going on. So there's a lot of growing intolerance on campuses for those who are not towing the line of the extreme left. This is a huge problem. And so people are saying that if all these last 10 years, if there has been such a pressure on not to say the wrong thing by center or center left faculty, forget center right. If you are center right, you are cancelled immediately. But if you're center left, you are simply not allowed to speak. You have to toe the line, or you don't even get tenure.
So what are donors, like, say, people like yourself, you're of Indian origin, and when you fund these campuses, or, like I said, people like yourself, do you also have, do you have oversight? Do you insist that there must be a certain line that should be followed? How does it work?
See, technically, we don't. Technically, nobody, the universities are very clear from the beginning that your donation is coming without any strings attached, of course. But that said, there is some kind of a moral and an ethical place for anybody who's been donating, especially at Penn and all these. These are $100 million donations and more, and these are typically alumni, right? So people who belong to the community. They're not outsiders. These are people who love the university, who want to do good for the university. And so what happens is that when such a gray zone arises, often there is, you're a phone call away. Mm-hmm. You're making a phone call, or you're going and having a lunch with the president of the university, and you're saying, look, what's going on here? Like, can you shed more light on this? Mm-hmm. And people express views. The problem is that the war has triggered this airing of the laundry in the open now. So now what people are doing is you are writing these articles, and they are out on Twitter. They are out on social media, like the letter from Bill Ackman of the Penn board or the Harvard board is out on social media now. So this is not something, that you're not doing it over a quiet lunch on campus. This is out and on. So it's very ugly now.
And it's very polarized. But Sally Kornbluth herself of MIT, she's Jewish. And she also defended her students, and she said that, listen, it all depends on the context. And I think that's the point I'd also like to make, is that a lot of these things are completely unacceptable and out of line, especially when you're condemning a people, or you're stereotyping a nation or a race. I mean, that's totally out of line. We agree with that. Right. But a lot of protests, like, if the usage of the word intifada, it also depends on the context. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to unseat a government or eliminate a people. It's exactly. I think if you cross the line into violence, that would be unacceptable. But Sally Kornbluth, I mean, she's Jewish. Would you not say that she also defended her students and did it well?
And she did the right thing. I actually think that she did do the right thing. Her tone was right. Remember that the tone of McGill was what was a big problem in the congressional hearings. These are sort of subtle differences between all of them. And frankly, personally, I think that it's so unusual to find a Black woman to head a university. So in a way, we are all lucky that we found Claudine Gay, and she is the first Black woman to be running, Harvard. So those things are important. So where do you draw the line? Where do you say that, look, because she is a Black woman, and because it was so difficult to find a Black woman, let's now try and let's forget the fact that there's plagiarism problem now, or that she said this or that. So where do you draw the line and say no to something? So I think that, with Sally Kornbluth, I think she did the right thing, in defending us. And I do believe that in a way, certain things are okay to say because US does protect. But what this is going to do now, what this whole fiasco is going to do, is going to bring into discussion on university campuses now new sort of codes of conduct, which are not, they're not going to be draconian changes. You can still
not a
say
bad thing, because
things,
debate is always good. You have to discuss.
You can still say, right, you can still say anything you want, but I think it's going to be the request or the pressure is going to be on fair application of all codes of conduct to everybody. It cannot be that the code of conduct is only applicable to the Jewish students, but not to the Muslim students. You can't do that.
Now, last couple of questions. I want to ask you, you're sitting in the heart of the story, not just on this one, but several others. How is this going to impact US politics? You're coming into an election year. In fact, the US President Joe Biden has canceled his trip to India. He was invited as chief guest of the Republic Day celebrations. But obviously, there is things are happening, and which made him cancel such a big event, at least for us. How do you think this is going to impact?
No. So I think it had nothing to do with, look, his son is indicted, for some corruption.
Hunter Biden.
It's he's Biden. This has nothing to do with India. Biden.
No, not to do with India. I'm saying, how is this US? How is this? The storm in the US campuses. How is this going to impact the politics in America?
No, this is going to change. This is a tipping point. This is a tip of the iceberg. What this is going to do is first of all, it's going to demolish critical race theory. So critical race theory is going to be completely taken out of academia. I know that. And I think I'm glad actually that they're doing that, because the critical race theory is all about dividing people, dividing societies and communities as oppressor versus oppressed. It's a huge problem. And it's a very simplistic thing, and everything is a relationship of power.
You think it's going to be taken out of academia, at least in some key campuses?
It will be taken out. It will be. I'm hoping and I'm certain that it's going to happen. It's already begun. Second major thing that's going to happen is an abolishing of DEI departments in universities and even corporates now. DEI stands for diversity, equity, inclusion. And these departments were set up some 10 to 15 years ago to try and get more and more people in from diverse backgrounds and things like that. But DEI bureaucracies have now started actually becoming fairly restrictive in who is allowed in, who's not allowed. So, for example, I was talking to an Indian faculty member that I know at Brown University. He teaches religion, and he was saying he has to toe the line to the last millimeter. If he diverges even a little bit from the accepted, orthodoxy, he's in trouble. He'll be cancelled. He'll be, there'll be.
Like what? What kind of orthodoxy would he have to fall in line about?
Well, I shouldn't even say that he's at Cornell. I'm sure people are going to find out. But he's basically, look, he's a good intellectual. He's a fabulous scholar, but he may not agree completely with this extreme left view of oppressor, oppressed, and seeing everything from the lens of power differences. Now, what will happen to him? He's right now just not saying a word. He just hides his views. He doesn't say anything, but he does kind of, vent to some of us that, look, I can't say anything because the orthodoxy doesn't allow me to say anything because it's all taken over by the extreme left. So I think I have a feeling that the good thing that's going to come out of this is that people like him, who are serious scholars, will actually now have more freedom to say things that they want to say, engage in dialogue more openly and not hide. So I think this is good. So
how is this going to impact? How is this going to impact, say, Biden? Yeah.
Two things that are going to go are DEI and critical race theory. Okay, as far as Biden goes, first of all, he's suffering from a serious drop in approval ratings, right? So he's in very deep trouble right now. And I'm truly concerned, and we are all Biden supporters, to be honest, but we are all concerned right now that this is making it more and more realistic to assume that somebody like Trump is going to come in. Because Biden is losing so much support over immigration, not over inflation, over immigration. Because right now we have, 30,000, 40,000 people just walking in from the Mexican border. So there is a huge problem in Biden's own situation right now. And he's in deep trouble. At this point, he's in deep trouble. One of the things that Americans approve actually is his action in Israel. So, and there too, if you see the breakup of how people are responding to, you'll see that anybody who's 40 and up is pro-Israel and for pro-war, actually, and finishing things till the end. And people who are 20 to 40 are 30%, or more like 30 to 40% approval of the Israeli war. So the war effort of sort of what Biden has been doing towards the Israeli war has got overall 60% approval rating, which is good. But on immigration, he's failing completely. So I think this whole fallout is going to come back to bite Biden, and I'm worried about it.
So going into an election year, you think a lot of these issues are going to get even more polarized? The views around these issues are going to get even more polarized. Would you agree with that?
They are absolutely. The US, my fear right now is that I just hope it doesn't push Trump into the limelight, and we don't have 4 more years of Trump, or that's going to be a disaster in the making.
But, at least on this issue, it seemed to me as if the Democrats and the Republicans, so diverse in their ideology, but actually very similar views at least on the Israel-Palestine-Hamas war, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
There's interesting.
There's unqualified support for the war for Israel, and there is of course there's some opposition from the younger students and from campuses about civilian casualties, but overall there is a consensus in the US that Hamas has to be destroyed, taken out from the roots.
I think nobody disagrees with that, but I think the problem lies in conflating Hamas with ordinary civilian Palestinians. It's not, after all, they are not the ones who went to war. It is that that ugly,
absolutely.
The terrorist group that this absolutely horrifying incident. But just last question to you, since I have you with me on camera, I do want to ask you: is this going to affect the India-US relationship? The fact that the Americans are pulling back a bit. After all, Biden is not coming for the Republic Day celebration. So how is this going to impact the India-US relationship?
So my 2 cents, he's going to come later.
Okay.
He may not make it for January 26th. That's okay. He's going to come. This is not going to affect US-India relationship at all. If anything, it's going to strengthen it.
In what way? What does that mean?
Geopolitically, right now, given the way things are in the Middle East and in the South Pacific, I think there is no doubt in the Biden White House that India is a critical partner right now. So behind the scenes, even though there is huge amounts of smear campaign going on from Canada about the Indian ambassador and the Indian somebody from the Indian intelligence tried to kill XYZ terrorist here and so on and so forth. It's something that the White House is kind of just taking it in its own stride and saying, okay, fine. They're making some relatively normal noises about this just to keep Canada and those groups, under control. But overall, there is absolutely not a millimeter of wavering on US-India partnership. It's there for the long haul, and whether it's Biden or whether it's Trump, it is absolutely rock solid right now. I'm not worried at all.
Asha Jadeja Motwani, always a pleasure to talk to you. And thank you so much for your time and for speaking to me on ThePrint. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jyoti. Thank you. Good to see you.